Every Thursday evening at 8 p.m, our family joined the rest of our street in applauding the NHS and other key workers for all that they are doing for the country. It is becoming a small weekly gesture by which we can all show our thanks and honour those who are on the front line of this crisis. A century ago, another generation sought ways to honour those who had fought in the front line of an even greater and longer calamity. In towns and villages throughout Europe, war memorials were erected and have become part of our national consciousness. But I want to introduce you to another artist who was called upon to honour these men and women in a different way. Eugène Burnand is a little-known Swiss artist whose biggest commission was to draw a series of stunning pastel portraits of a representative of each and every service, Army, Navy, Air Force, Medical Corps, Chaplaincy, etc., of all the Allied nations at the close of the First World War. They are all together in the Museum of the Legion of Honour in Paris. Here are just a few examples of over 100 he painted. These portraits honour the lives of those men and women who sacrificed their safety, and often their lives, to secure the safety and lives of others. This collection is almost unknown, and if the artist is known at all, it is for another picture. This depicts the scene described in the Gospel on Easter Sunday. Peter and John running to the tomb as the dawn is just breaking. The first series of pictures commemorate and honour the self-sacrifice of people in one of the darkest chapters in our human history. The other one, the incomprehending, baffled hope of two men running towards what had been, for 3 days, the end point of a tragic life. A terribly mutilated body in a dark tomb, which had been firmly shut by a huge and heavy stone. As they run forward, they are totally disorientated, stunned by the news they have heard from Mary Magdalene, that his body is no longer in the tomb. Is this just another ignominious humiliation to add to the brutal death of their friend and teacher? A grim PS to the shocking death of a good man? Or did they dare hope as they ran on that maybe all the strange things which their Lord talked about, incomprehensible talk about rising on the third day, was actually true? Today, the Western world's temptation is to view life as a book, in which, between the two covers of birth and death, are written all the events, exciting, tedious, frightening, heroic or shameful, which we experience or shape in between. All, inverted commas, that is left when the final page is turned and the book is shut is to honour that life. That is an important way in which we deal with grief, remembering and savouring the highlights of the life of our friends. So it was with Jesus' disciples. As the heavy stone was rolled shut on Jesus' life, consolation would have to come from honouring his memory. And yet, that doesn't quite give a true picture of what it is to be human. For why do we hope? For hope is an inescapable part of our humanity. It is just as much a part of every human life as a head and a heart. We can't live without it. But if all our lives are just a series of books which, when shut, will be honoured by our friends, then that hope is a lie. For on the face of it, death is the back cover of our life's book. It is not hope. A good end does not seem to be the end of the story, and yet still we hope. A good film, a good book, a good story always ends with a hero overcoming the obstacles. It ends well. It doesn't end badly. But seemingly all our lives end, giving the lie to the hope which sustains us all our lives long. Yet still we hope. So it is with us today. We are all confined, restricted to our homes. Narrow walls hem us in, and we long for freedom and fulfilment. In a word, we hope. As Jesus says to Julian of Norwich, a 14th century mystic, "But all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well." Something beyond reason, deep within us, knows that it is true, that in the end evil does not triumph. Why? This Easter Sunday, we relive the story of a man whose life could never fit into any tidy little book, with the front cover of his birth, an exciting life, and the back cover of his death. For the end of this story did not end in death, but ended in resurrection. In fact, it did not even do that. It opened up in resurrection. When Jesus' friends, Peter and John, ran towards the tomb in that bewildered scramble, they did not know what they would find. For what no eye has seen, nor ear heard, nor the heart of man conceived, what God has prepared for those who love him. You simply can't conceive of what they saw and experienced. That is why the descriptions of the resurrection are so excitedly confused. The Gospel writers describe as best they can what is indescribable. For how can the finite conceive of the infinite, the mortal the eternal, or anything within our lived experience of the bounded and the constrained, the utterly free? So we have descriptions of bewilderment and fear, of a woman initially confusing the risen Jesus for a gardener, of Jesus appearing amongst his disciples behind locked doors, doing things which you would associate with a ghost, yet still able to sit down with them, talk with them, walk along a road with them, and eat fish and break bread with them. If the eternal enters time, it's going to be confusing. It's also going to have explosive power, and that is what happened. The reports of the resurrection are excited, confused, and have been to me the foundation of my faith ever since I was a young teenager. They are not the much later accretions of later generations of Christians, building myth upon myth in the way fairy tales develop. St. Paul's letters to the Corinthian church are amongst the earliest part of the New Testament, written 20 years after the events. Most theologians agree that the passages describing the resurrection are Paul's transmission of a much earlier tradition. From the very start of the church's life then, the good news, the central message passed on has been, he is alive. And we long to be alive. We long for the fullness of life. We long for freedom. Beyond the very real constraints which the pandemic has imposed on all of us, lives an insistent yearning to break the chains, to be free. And that is what Jesus promises. As the Gospel of John puts it, so if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. But free from what exactly? Clearly the analogy is not perfect, as we all have to stay indoors for our and everybody else's safety. We have no choice, and we are doing it for a good reason. But in another way, the walls of our flats and houses can stand in for our human predicament. We feel cramped in, claustrophobic and imprisoned, which is what sin does to us. In our search for freedom and independence from God, we lock ourselves up into our own egos, trying and always failing to keep control over the script of our lives. For we want to be in charge of where our story is going. Sin does not only confine us to the dungeons of our own ego, it blinds us to what is real. We lose all sense of perspective. For as we seek to keep control of the script, we completely miss the point. For we are not the centre of the drama. We are not the main hero of the story. We are instead called to be part of a much bigger story. A story which started before our births in the mind of God, and which God invites us into beyond the open door of death. At the centre of this story is God made man. In the words of one theologian, we are not in the ego drama. We are called to play our part in the infinitely more exciting theodrama. Come, follow me.